we all know that machine learning and deep learning are basically sub areas of artificial intelligence. It's just one area of artificial intelligence, and actually deep learning is also considered to be a subset of machine learning. We'll just talk briefly about that, but we are going to focus the discussion primarily on the explainability of machine learning systems, right? And what you see in this diagram that you see here is a model process for a machine learning solution, right? And when we talk about machine learning solution, again, there can be diverse types of machine learning solutions. So we all know that there are three major types. One is supervised, second one is unsupervised, and third one is reinforcement. So this particular process is more focused towards supervised learning. So as we know, when we have a supervised learning process, right, we have some past data. Say, for example, we are trying to build a solution for predicting the stock prices in stock market, right? I mean, this is a very typical scenario that we work on machine learning problem on, right? Now, when we have that, the input to this whole thing, the solution building, is basically the past data. Okay, so the past data means, say, for the last 5 years or for the past 15 years, what has been the price for the different stocks, right? So that is the data that we look at. Say, for example, when we are looking at real estate price prediction. So the typical data that we want to feed into the system as the past data are the prices of different real estates, different apartments and all, with the different parameters being mentioned. Say, for example, the overall square feet area of the apartment, or the location of the apartment, right? Or say, for example, which floor the apartment is situated in, right? So those are the different attributes or different features, we call it in the machine learning paradigm. We call it features. And based on that, we have a set of past data. So what all different apartments were sold out, what were the different values of those features or attributes that we were talking about, like square feet area, location, floor, etc. And what was the price point that it fetched, right? So that is our input data. Based on that, what we do is we have a so-called model, which is basically nothing but an algorithm, right? I mean, you all know. Ultimately, model is nothing but an algorithm. So we have the input data, train that model, and once the model is trained, we try to basically when we have the input data, we segregate a portion of it. So that portion of it which is segregated out is called the test data, and the other portion which is used to train the model is called training data. So when we train the model based on the training data, we use that segregated portion of the data, which is called the test data, to find the efficiency of the model, how good that the model is predicting the figures, or how close the predicted figures are basically to the actual data. Okay, so say, for example, apartment price, the model is predicting certain price. How close is that price to the real price on which that particular apartment was being sold out, right? So that is the test data. And what we try to do is we try to evaluate the performance of the model based on the test data. And that's how we decide how good or bad the model is working, right? So this is a typical machine learning process. And whatever model we adopt, we are familiar with certain names, right? Like KNN is a very simple machine learning model. Then we also know about decision tree. There are other multiple different models in machine learning. So we just adopt one model, we train that model, we exercise that model on the test data, and we see how good or bad that model is performing. Right? This is the overall machine learning process. Now, what are the difficulties? I mean, what was the basic motivation that we had to switch to deep learning in certain cases? So for that, we need to understand there are three major points which were there. The first point is when we provide that input data, this input data to train the model, the basic premise based on which the performance of a machine learning model will be actually good or bad is dependent on how closely that particular input data represents the problem domain. Okay, what do we mean by that? We mean by that there is a term called variability in statistics. That means a particular data, how much of the variance does it cover? The problem domain, in terms of the problem domain, how much of the variance does it cover as a part of the data? More variability it will cover, it is supposed to represent the problem domain in the closest way. And the data, when used for training a model, the model is going to give a very good performance. That is the assumption, right? So I'm not going to get into details of that because that's a completely different topic by itself. But one problem that was observed in machine learning is over dependency on data quantity and quality. When we say quantity and quality, we actually mean that whether the problem domain has been sufficiently represented in the data which is given for training the model, right? So that is the first aspect. There is a over dependency on the data quality and quantity. The second aspect, I mean, as I was telling, there are different algorithms or different models of machine learning, like k-nearest neighbor, decision tree, random forest. There are so many other different models, right? However, the biggest dilemma that any person faces when he or she starts as a new data scientist is which model to adopt for a particular problem. And that there is no golden rule for that. That if the data is like this, you take this model and you'll get a fabulous result. There is nothing like that. So the challenge is that dilemma doesn't have an answer for, or rather there is no golden answer for. It only depends on your gut feel, and that gut feel develops only by experience, right? So that becomes a very challenging problem to address. Over dependency on the model selection, right? The third problem, which is also a big problem, is when we have the data coming in, the training data or the input data. Generally, if we try to express the variability in the data, the volume of the data keeps on growing. And we have now the big data systems, we have enough infrastructural resources at our disposal. So, I mean, getting more and more data is actually not a challenge. But the challenge becomes when we try to use the data to train the model. What by default machine learning algorithms try to do is they try to load the entire data into the memory, and they want to they try to train the model. By default, the tendency is to load the entire volume of the data to the memory. So that means what we are doing is we are overloading the memory, and it might so happen that if the memory is not sufficient, we might have a situation that the process goes for a complete toss. The algorithm is not able to train itself, okay, because the resources that it has, basically the memory that it has to its disposal is not sufficient, right? So this becomes a big problem where if we get more data, we should be in a better situation, but actually it becomes a bottleneck situation, right? So these were primarily the three biggest motivators: scaling to the data volume, over dependency on model selection, and over dependency on data quality and quantity. These were the primary aspects based on which we actually transitioned to deep learning. The age of deep learning got ushered in, right? And the way it basically deep learning addresses these problems, again, I'm going to just cover in a very, very nutshell. The first thing that deep learning brought into picture, the first concept, is the concept of representation learning. So basically, when we talk about deep learning is basically a feature-based learning. That means it learns, the models learn the features from the data. And based on the features, they make the future predictions. Whereas in case of deep learning, it doesn't really focus on the feature. It basically focuses on the representation of the data, right? So it is basically a level of abstraction. And with that level of abstraction, that dependency on the data variability, data quality gets reduced to a large extent, right? So that is the reason why we were able to address this one particular shortfall in machine learning models when we go for deep learning model, right? That's one. The second aspect, which was the problem of model selection, that also gets eliminated because deep learning, as we know, is based on the concept of neural networks. And neural networks, there is a famous universal approximation theorem which states that even a very simple neural network having one or two hidden layers is able to approximate a fairly complex function. And what we try to do as a part of model training is nothing but approximate the function, the objective function, right? So that way, it basically is able to address the over dependency on model selection, and the dilemma is kind of removed, right? So this is the second challenge which was addressed by deep learning. The third problem, the scaling up of data, there is a concept of online learning, or some people call it batch learning in deep learning, which is a default, right? It doesn't need to be differently or separately implemented, or you don't have to write any additional line of code. Basically, it can work based on just a parameter value, right? So these concepts of breaking the whole data into small batches or compartments, that addresses the whole problem of having to load the data set, the entire data set, to memory, right? So that way, the concept of having batch learning or online learning addresses the issues with the scaling up of the data, right? So that way, the three most critically perceived challenges of machine learning was addressed by the deep learning model. Any question or anything? Okay. Is there any question till now? Okay. Let me move on quickly, and we can, we can stop by for questions later on. Now, this is just a very representative figure of machine learning versus deep learning. So as we were talking about the machine learning, when we talk about that, first does the feature extraction, or basically identification of the features, and then it bases the learning on the features, the extracted features. So we have a feature extraction as a pre-processing activity, and then as a part of the model building or model training, we just do the training on the extracted features, right? So feature-based learning, as we were talking about, right? Whereas in case of deep learning, we have the feature extraction and learning going hand in hand, going together, right? So net effect is the same. However, the process perspective, there is a shift. Why did I talk about so many things? Now, the thing is, first of all, we need to understand is there has been some kind of a paradigm shift from machine learning to deep learning. And the practitioners, what they have seen is with the with the adoption of deep learning or deep neural networks, there has been a radical improvement in terms of the accuracy, which is one of the primary measures for the model performance. But at the same time, what it has also brought in And that has not only happened with the deep learning, but also with some of the complex forms of the machine learning models. What has happened is the accuracy has gone up. So the accuracy of the model has definitely increased. So we see, I mean, if we kind of do a plotting of the model accuracy versus the model interpretability. Interpretability, when I say, means how easily we are able to understand the way the model is performing. So if we look at that kind of a scenario, then we see that as we are going up the chain, as we are having more and more accuracy, the interpretability of the model or the way we can understand the model, there is a drastic fall in that. So when we start from the other end, that the models are very much interpretable, or we are pretty much able to understand, just like a white box model, that what the model is doing and how it is doing it. Why, what, and how. These are the three things for model interpretability. And these things, these particular questions are very easily understood in the case of the models which fall in the lower end of the curve, the logistic regression or the decision tree or the k nearest neighbor, right? But as we are increasing the accuracy and we are slowly moving towards neural network, and before that the different ensemble methods, we see that there is a drastic fall in terms of the interpretability. So basically we are not able to answer the questions, the why, how, and what questions so easily. In fact, for the neural networks, it is almost impossible to give an explanation beyond a certain extent, right? So that is the whole trade-off that we have to land up with. We are getting more accuracy at the cost of the transparency of the model or the interpretability of the model, right? So this is where we have started having certain difficulties, okay? Now, what kind of difficulties are we having? Let's try to look at some of that. So basically, opacity of the model has few challenges. Okay, let me name a few challenges. There are many more such examples, but just a few challenges. I'm sure all of you have at least heard of unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, or I'm sure you have all heard about these Google cars, right? The driverless cars, right? We call them the segment of autonomous vehicles, right? The vehicles which don't need any manual intervention. It is completely driven in an automated fashion, right? Now the challenge is these vehicles were performing in a very superior way. I mean, almost like a fancy way they were performing, and people almost started believing that they can play God, right? They can make the vehicles which can drive themselves, and they don't have to get any driver for that, right? But the challenge which was, which kind of stopped this whole thing, whole chain, is when we are having certain little bit of abnormal situation which is not anticipated. Okay, there is a very specific term. I don't want to get into details, just to take the term, take reference of the term, when there are certain adversarial situations. Okay, then the way these particular vehicles were performing was absolutely catastrophic. And when those catastrophic situations happen, say for example on a road where hundreds of other civilians are driving their own vehicles, then obviously there is a big problem, right? That is one thing that was a big impediment, right? Safety critical applications, wherever we are applying machine learning models in employing or deploying safety critical systems, There we have a big challenge. If we are not able to understand why a particular situation is happening, or if we are not able to rightly predict each and every possible situation, then we have a big challenge. Okay, we have a catastrophic situation. That's one. Second case, in medical domain. Medical domain is another domain we all know which has heavily adopted machine learning. And not only in one or two areas, in multiple areas, starting from different image analysis to drug prescription, or even right now when we are in a situation where in a pandemic situation, a lot of it has been also used for drug discovery and stuff like that, right? So in those situations, what we see is also if the model is behaving even in a little bit of a unpredictable way or weird way, there is a very, very big impact on health of human beings, right? So we cannot allow such a situation to happen. We need to be absolutely sure what is happening and why, right? So for that reason, opacity is a big challenge. Last but not the least, it might not be a life and death situation, but it can be a very, very catastrophic situation in a financial world. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. There is something called algorithmic trading, which in a very layman's term means, say for example, I am putting my money on stock market to buy different shares, and in stock market we all know that the stock prices may either go up or it may go down, right? So it's actually the prediction, the accuracy of prediction or the efficiency of prediction has a lot of role to play. Now, say for example, human beings may be wrong, right? They may predict a situation based on a very few handful set of data. But if we are able to implement some complex models, machine learning models, we can bake in a lot more different data and we can build that model, and we may expect a much more accurate result to come out from the model, right? And that is being heavily adopted at the moment. Lot of the moment, there is some kind of a bot which is basically putting in money in favor of the large financial organizations. And in case those bots, which are basically nothing but some computer programs, right, they are going wrong on certain aspects, that can actually lead to a huge financial loss for that organization, right? So that is, again, that might not be a life and death situation, but again, it can be a very, very bad situation. It can actually lead to financial bankruptcy of organizations, right? So in those kind of critical situations, opacity of a model is a big, big issue, right? Uh, Reason is somebody has to own up the responsibility, and there is a very difficult proposition that any person can stand in and vouch for the algorithm or the model unless that person is 100% sure what the model is doing. Otherwise, it's very difficult for him or her to take responsibility in lieu of that particular computer program, right? So that is the reason why we need to have very solid scientific evidence, and we cannot be banking our judgment on certain spurious correlation. So what the particular model may spit out as a prediction is possibly a very, very random coincidence. It is not a scientific this thing. It's not based on a solid scientific foundation. So that case, it's very difficult that today it has given a very accurate and a very close to ground truth kind of a prediction, but tomorrow the prediction may be completely in a wrong direction, and it might result in a very, very catastrophic situation, either in terms of health hazard or in terms of financial hazard, right? So that's the reason why opacity is a challenge. And what you can see is there are multiple examples where this opacity has led to major events. I will just name a few of them so that you can understand what I'm talking about. This is one particular press release which came out in June 13, 2017 in New York Times. A particular convict, his name was Glenn Rodriguez. A particular deep learning program, there was a tool called Compass, which was based on some kind of a deep learning algorithm, right? So that deep learning algorithm denied the parole for this particular convict. And later it was found that the basis on which the parole was denied was absolutely a wrong basis. There was a bit of a miscalculation based on which the parole was denied, and it was actually quite a bad impact for that unfortunate convict. And this is not one isolated event. Lot of such events were being found in the past. Many other people, many other convicts were denied parole because of certain guidance given by the deep learning tool Compass, right? So this is one very real life example. There are other multiple examples. There has been multiple lawsuits being filed against YouTube, Facebook, and all the biggies. I mean, we can hear about YouTubes and Facebooks because they are large organizations, but there are so many other organizations which has actually been they have been slapped a fine because of certain things, certain violations, either violation of child privacy or violation because of some racial discrimination or violation because of certain other lack of transparency. So there was another very well-known case study. I mean, you can just go to internet and search for it. There was a huge uproar against a particular recruitment drive of Microsoft because people felt basically the candidates felt that there was a racial bias which was actually followed during the particular recruitment drive. And when people tried to find out whether that allegation level was actually true or not, what they could figure out was actually that was a true allegation, and it was not because of any intentional fault. It was an unintentional fault because the data which was used to train the model had certain inherent, what should I say, discrepancies, or rather inherent, what should I say, unbalanced nature which resulted in a discrimination. A specific racial group or ethnic group was amongst the selected candidates in that particular data. So when the model was actually trained based on the data and it was trying to predict the potentially suitable candidates, it was actually predicting more candidates belonging to that particular racial segment. So obviously, because the data was like that, the inherent problem was in the data itself. That's why the prediction was also going in that direction, right? So that's why people felt that there is a problem, right? This opacity of the model has a big problem. And that's the reason why in 2017, there was a guidance given by the Financial Stability Board, which is an international agency which monitors the global financial systems, more of a Europe-based society. So that basically stressed on the interpretability of the algorithms and the outcomes from the algorithms which are being used for decision making. So they kind of made it a tacit mandate that the models need to be at least transparent to the extent that people are able to understand why a particular decision is being given by their model. So that was mandated, right? So that kind of all these things that we have seen, the opacity of the complex models, so-called complex models, which supposedly yields very good result, but at the same time, as and when it gets more and more precise in terms of the predictions, it gets more and more opaque. So that's the reason why there was a need for there was a need for making these models more and more transparent. And obviously, if we as human beings are being asked the same question that you see in the screen now, if we are held accountable for the decision of a machine learning model in contexts of financial safety, security, or something which has a personal ramification, right? Would we blindly trust the decision of the algorithm, the machine learning model, or the deep learning model? That is a question. If we ask to ourselves, I think more often than not, all of us are going to give an answer. No, we are not going to blindly trust the model. Till now, it doesn't hurt us so much because what we are doing, at least in the academic sector, most of it are just as kind of academic exercises. It really doesn't have a fatal impact most often, right? But if we are actually doing it for something which has a direct impact on life and death of human beings, or it might have a catastrophic impact on the financial health, right? Then we will definitely think twice, right? So we will not be able to blindly trust the decision of a model. So for that, we are definitely going to ask for something which can explain the models in a better way, right? So in that kind of a highly consequential situation, or a situation where there might be an ethical implication, we definitely will look for some kind of a rationale based on which a model is giving a particular decision. And that particular area which deals with unboxing that opaque opaque model, is known as explainability of AI, or explaining AI, or XAI, right? So that's where we basically start from, right? An explainable AI or XAI is an AI system in which the actions can be easily understood and analyzed by humans. We are able to understand why, how, and what, right? And that is based on a few very basic principles. I mean, probably we all know about it, we just didn't think about it in that way. First thing is transparency. Whatever we have the right to understand, or we, hello, any question? Anyone has any question? I think somebody has raised a hand. Do you have a question? I think it was Bishwajit. Bishwajit, do you have a question?
No, sir, I didn't watch. It was sorry, sir.
Okay, no problem. Fine. Anyone has any question? Because I think I'm just speaking through. I mean, does it make sense? What we are talking about, does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So please pause me if you want to. I mean, if you have questions, just please pause me. I'll be happy to take the questions, right? Now, so what we are talking about, there are a few basic aspects. So first one is transparency. So we have every right to understand the decisions which have been taken in a very clear and simple way that any one of us, even a layman, can understand, right? So for example, I will come to that particular case study briefly. Say for example, we are not being given a particular loan or something, we have every right to understand, fine, these were the shortfalls that we had, because of which we didn't get the, or because of which we didn't qualify to get the loan, right? So this is one thing. Second aspect is causality. If we can learn a model from the data, can this model provide us with not only the correct inferences but some explanation for the underlying phenomenon? Again, kind of related. So basically, it will tell us that what it has given, what has been the basis for that, right? So transparency and causality kind of goes hand in hand, because both of them ultimately help in unboxing the black box, right? Third point, bias. So, I mean, the example that I was talking about, the recruitment drive example. So, the data which had inherent shortfall, that shortfall is basically a racial bias. Unknowingly, it was happening, but it was definitely happening. So, we need to be very, very sure that the data or even the model is not biased, is not getting biased to give some undue advantage to a particular segment of the population, right? So that is the third aspect. Fourth aspect again goes hand in hand with bias. Along with some racial bias or whatever, we need to be sure that whatever decision has been made, we are able to verify that the decision has been made exactly in the way that it has told it will make the decision. So fairness, right? The way it has conducted the whole thing, the decision making process is a fair process. We tell, right? I mean, we tell that our competitive exams, we expect a very fair evaluation. That means there is no partiality, there is no bias, right? So that's the fourth aspect. The fifth aspect is the safety element of it. Very, very important. Basically, when there is a mission critical application or a life threatening application, that time we need to have a very, very clear understanding that there is no possibility of a fatal consequence. Again, there are different ways to ensure that, but that aspect is the fifth aspect, that safety needs to be ensured. In case of ensuring safety, if the model has to make some incorrect decisions, in incorrect decisions just to be on the safe side, that no life is getting threatened, that is a better deal than actually resulting in a very fatal consequence, right? So these are the few factors that an explainable AI system needs to ensure, right? And at the same time, there is a question that sometimes come in our mind, that do we, that means it's perfectly understood that the models might churn out a incorrect result, which might be either biased or unfair or whatever. But does it mean that we have to apply explainability in each and every model? Actually, that is not the case. So we have to be very mindful about the nature of the application. Is it a sensitive application which can lead to a lot of issues in terms of life or financial health? Or normally it is a general application which doesn't have so much of consequence. Say, for example, applications which are meant for entertainment. Say, for example, movie recommendation applications, or we have this, what do we say, that app which suggests a lot of music, right? Spotify, right? So those kind of applications, these are harmless applications. Even if there is a bias, say, for example, Spotify keeps on suggesting only Bengali songs. Okay, it's definitely a biased choice it is giving, no doubt about it. But at the same time, the consequence is not so much fatal, right? Online translation services, yeah, I mean, in most cases, we use it as just a complementary service. And I mean, it's good to have very accurate results, but even if it is not that accurate, most cases will not have a fatal end result, right? So this kind of trivial, non-critical applications we can do without having an explainability, right? But in cases, as we talked about, the critical applications like the autonomous vehicles or in the medical applications where there's a lot of hazardous uh, outcome which is expected, in that case, we definitely do need explainability. I mean, it's better to go for explainability of the AI systems, right? So in short, we don't need to force fit it in each and every AI system. We can take it based on the need. For non-critical solutions, we can leave it. For the critical solutions, we can take it. There is a exception. In case we are working for certain customer, we are working on a paid project, even if it is a non-critical application, but customer wants to understand why our algorithm is giving a particular prediction. They have every right to understand, right? They are paying for it. So that way, that situation also, we can use XAI algorithms to explain the AI systems that we have built, right? So it is completely based on need. It's not like every algorithm or every AI system needs to be complemented by a explainable algorithm, explainability algorithm, right? So that's something we need to bear in mind. And breaking the opacity, how we can break it, I think we have already talked about it. We have to ensure the what, why, and how portions. The what, why, and how. These questions need to be answered. When we look at the model and the inferences or the decisions they are making, we need to be sure that we understand the what perspective, the why perspective, and the how perspective. If we are sure about that, we can say that we are able to break the opacity of the model. Okay, I think that is related to the this thing. One more thing, I mean, just a very trivial thing. These two terms, explainability of AI systems and interpretability of models, they are used very much interchangeably, though there is a very fine line of differentiation. But for the sake of at least today's discussion, we can kind of use it interchangeably. Explainability as well as interpretability. But there is a very fine line of difference between them. Okay? I will pause at this point. Please ask any questions because now we are going to move to the next segment of the discussion. If you have any questions, please raise now.
So when talking about transparent AI, are you talking about algorithms such as decision tree or random forest? Because in those cases also you have an idea of like a clear idea of the control flow of the decision making process. So that can that be categorized into responsible AI or
Not actually.
transparent AI?
Actually, one of them belong to that segment, the other one not. Because see, just to understand, when we are going for a decision tree model, actually decision tree, I mean, if you had seen that graph, decision tree lies in the zone which is very much interpretable. We can interpret the results because it's a very clear tree-based decision-making process. So decision tree is a more transparent AI system, right? But random forest is basically it's a tree of trees, right? So whenever we go for random forest, or for that matter, when we go for any ensemble based technique, that time the transparency gets more and more vague, right? The way we are able to explain the whole flow in case of a single decision tree, the moment we move to a random forest model, the whole thing gets in the much more complex zone. You can't say that, okay, fine, this is that particular feature, which is the root feature, where the variability is explained to the largest extent. You cannot say that because ultimately there are multiple trees based on which the whole decision-making process is taking. And also at the same time, the results are getting combined in different fashions. Either you can take a majority vote or you can take a weighted average. Different methods are being adopted. So the moment you go for ensembling of those decision trees, it's very difficult to say exactly which was the feature which was most instrumental in that particular decision making, right? So random forest, we cannot say it to be a very transparent model, right? But decision tree definitely is a very transparent model, and that's why it is one of the most interpretable models. In
Okay,
fact,
sir.
I mean, just to add to your question, there is a new concept which is slowly evolving for the last couple of years. At least I have seen multiple works in that area. People are trying to represent neural networks, complex neural network based systems, as trees. And people are calling that neural trees, or some people are calling neural backed decision trees, NBDT, right? So that is a way how a complex neural network model is trying to be translated in terms of a decision tree model, a decision tree being a much more interpretable model. Right.
Yes, sir. And can you give me some examples of interpretable AI that is currently being used?
Yeah, we are going to go into that. Actually, we are
Okay.
going to look into two very prominent algorithms. We'll also try to do a bit of a deep dive into the philosophy they are based on. We are going to cover that.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Anyone else? Let's be interactive. I mean, let's not just let not be me make the talking. I mean, if you have questions, please ask the questions. There is no don't be need to be shy.
Sir, can you explain that first point, why we need deep learning?
Okay, so see, I mean, we were very happy with the machine learning because machine learning in many cases give very fantastic results, like a little more complex machine learning algorithms. They give quite precise results. The challenge is whenever I mean, as we are talking about, there are three factors. First factor, say for example, I am trying to do the prediction of flowers. Okay, I have a large bunch of flower images, and I'm trying to get a model which can predict the particular type of a flower, right? Say for example, rose. Okay, we have a lot of flowers, rose, then hibiscus, petunia, whatever. There are multiple different flower images. We are training the model, and when we are giving a new image, say for example, rose, I want my model to give the classification as a rose. Now the challenge is, say for example, I have trained the model with three different colors of rose: pink, yellow, and say for example some other thing, red, right? Now, say for example, I am giving a new image of a rose which is white in color, and the model has never looked at a white rose. Rather, it has looked at a white petunia. So there is a potential chance that the rose will be misclassified as a petunia, right? So that is the reason why we need to feed the model with each and every variety of rose, different colors of rose, to be sure that our machine learning model is going to always churn out the right result. If we don't give a certain type, there is a high probability that down the line, when I am trying to see the type of that flower with that model that I have trained, it is going to come with the incorrect type just because it has never seen that particular type. So this is one. Okay, that's why we told that the data needs to be sufficient. The data quality needs to be sufficient, right? It needs to capture all the variability, right, of the domain. That's one. Second thing that we talked about is the biggest dilemma that we have whenever we start with modeling is which particular model we are going to adopt. Is it going to be a decision tree, or is it going to be a naive Bayes? It's going to be a KNN? We don't know. And we have seen that different data in different situations give result in different ways. In certain cases, decision tree gives a very high accuracy. In some other case, decision tree gives completely a raw, I mean, very low accuracy. So we are completely puzzled. We are not able to decide which model to adopt at what time, right? So for that reason, we have a huge dilemma in terms of the model adoption. There are multiple choices and we are confused, right? So that's the second problem. Third problem, as we told, with the increase of data, the default behavior of machine learning is it is going to load the entire bulk of data to memory and then train the model. So if the data grows, volume grows beyond a certain extent, it's going to be very difficult. Without ample resource, you will not be able to train the model. That's a big problem. So these things actually necessitated the use or adoption of deep learning. Okay,
Okay, sir, it's clear now.
excellent. Any other question?
So, if we are looking for too much of interpretability of the AI models, can we lose out on the accuracy part at times?
Yeah, that is the whole dilemma. That's what we talked about. It has been seen. Again, I will come to one summarization slide. There are different viewpoints actually, but general viewpoint is as the interpretability, as the models are more and more interpretable, accuracy is not so promising. Like decision trees and I mean this thing, your linear regressors, they are very, very interpretable, but at the same time, the results they churn out are not amongst the best. Whenever you go for some neural network based model, the probability of giving good outcome in terms of the accuracy is much more, right? So obviously the promise of giving a better result in terms of accuracy and other things, that kind of, I mean, that's a general perception, that kind of decreases as the model is more and more interpretable.
And just can you link up once the part of latent factor discovery with explainable AI?
I will resist that discussion, Aritso, because we are going to completely digress to a different zone, and there are a lot of things which are left to be covered still. We have just probably covered half of the discussion. There are a lot of other things, so maybe we can park that for a later discussion. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank you. Fine. Let's move to the next part. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Now, just to give an overview, the different methods of explainable algorithms. So there are different algorithms. I mean, as we sit today, there are at least some 50, 60 different algorithms, I mean, for explainable, for explainability, right? Or explaining the AI models or machine learning or deep learning models, right? Now, there are two very clear, I mean, at least that's one point of view of explaining it. There are two ways of having these AI algorithms classified into, right? One is the perceptive algorithms, okay? Some algorithms which we can understand from common sense. Okay, the way those algorithms explain the outcome of the models, it is extremely, what should I say? It is, I mean, very implicit, right? The way it is being explained, a very common sense way, anyone can understand it. So that is called the perceptive way. And the other one, which is a more rigorous one, is the explanation of models based on mathematical foundations, right? So there are certain ways which we can adopt by which we can explain the outcome of models, AI models, using mathematical foundations, right? We are not going to deep dive into this because that's not the intent, but just to quickly cover, so perceptibility, the perceptible interpretability, or rather the way, the common sense interpretability kind of, you can name it. There are again couple of approaches. One is called the saliency based approach and the other one is called the signal method. Okay, so the way they can understand is it's a saliency based approach. Say for example, let me take an example. Very clearly when we are looking at images, right? And say for example, we are looking at a animal image, the typical age-old cat dog classification, right? There are specific features of the, or rather there are specific areas of the image of a cat face or a dog face or a cat image or a dog image which we can use as human beings, right, to say that this is a cat or this is a dog, right? So there are certain algorithms, there are certain XAI algorithms which also use the same thing. They highlight the specific segment of the images. If it is text, it is a different thing. Just let's take the example of images. It will highlight a specific segment of the image and it will say that, okay, fine, the model has given a judgment that this is a cat because of this particular segment of the image or this particular set of pixels, and there is a name attached to it. It is called superpixel. So this particular superpixel or superpixels are responsible for calling out this image as a cat image. So the XAI algorithm is going to mark those superpixels. So that is in the saliency based approach. Whereas in signal method, what it tries to do is it tries to play, and if we talk about in terms of the CNN algorithm, which is a particular segment of the algorithm, or even if we don't talk about the CNN algorithm, just a normal neural network based algorithm, what it tries to do is it tries to activate or deactivate certain neurons in the neural network and tries to see the prediction that it is churning out. Based on that, it is going to tell that, okay, fine, out of this whole neural network, these particular neurons were most critical in terms of making these decisions, right? So that way, it is giving some kind of an idea that of the overall neural network, which segments of the neural network were responsible in a particular prediction outcome, right? So that is going to help us understand why and how a particular model is basically giving a particular outcome. So that is the perceptible interpretability. The other method, oh, there is one more other variant of it called verbal interpretability that is more applicable for text data, where I'm sure most of you have already gone through the propositional logic, right? So in propositional logic, there are certain things for building. There are certain implication statements, there are certain by implication statements. So there are certain complex propositional statements or propositional blocks which are used to build a logic. So basically, when we say logic, what it means is when I come up with an inference, what were the building propositions for coming with that inference, right? So that kind of an interpretability is called the verbal interpretability. In case we are able to formulate the predicates based on which a particular inference was being churned out, right? So that is the verbal interpretability. So perceptible interpretability again has certain different subcategories. The first one was your saliency based approach. Second one was the signal approach, signal method, and the third one is the verbal interpretability. So that was the perceptible interpretation. The second type is on the mathematical structures, and there are certain models. I'm not going to go into details of that. So there are certain models like the TSNE or the singular vector correlation analysis. So those kind of specific mathematical models, generative additive models, GAM. So those are used to again explain the model in a very mathematical formulation, right? So that way it is based on hardcore mathematical formulation, right? So that is the second way that the XAI methods are based out in. But for today's discussion, we are going to base on very popular two algorithms. One algorithm is called the Lime algorithm, which is based on perceptible interpretability, and the second one is based on is called SHAP. Again, that's also perceptible interpretability, but it has a bit of a mathematical foundation also in it. So we are going to talk about these two algorithms and the philosophy behind these two algorithms. Okay. Now, before I get into Lime, I need to explain a very fundamental philosophy. So, there is the concept of surrogate models. What do we mean by surrogate models? I mean, from a concept, common sense perspective, what is a surrogate? Surrogate is basically a replacement, right? It's kind of a proxy, right? So what we try to do in case of a surrogate model is, for a particular black box model which is hardly interpretable or hardly understandable, we try to build a surrogate to the black box model, okay, which is an interpretable model. That surrogate model is going to closely emulate this black box model. And since the surrogate model is explainable or interpretable, we can understand, or we can try to understand, the prediction of the black box model in terms of that surrogate model. Am I clear? So first, you have got a black box model. Black box model is giving certain outcome which is not interpretable. We are not able to understand. So what do? We build a proxy model or a surrogate model. That proxy model needs to be very, very close in terms of prediction. Okay. In terms of prediction to whatever data it is given, it is basically churning out a very similar outcome as the black box model. So what we think about is a proxy model to that black box model, and that proxy model is a very, very interpretable model, right? Like a decision tree, right? So that way we are creating a proxy model which is a interpretable model to explain the black box model, right? So this is the concept of surrogate model. So what is the step? I mean, again, very, very simple. Select a dataset X. This can be the same dataset that was used for training the black box model, or a new dataset from the same distribution. You select. You can also select a subset of that model. Then what you do for the selected dataset X, get the predictions from the black box model, right? Then you select the interpretable model, whatever interpretable model you want to choose, either a decision tree model, or if it is a regression situation, we can also go for linear model. So choose a interpretable model. Then train the interpretable model based on the dataset X and its predictions. Then you have the surrogate model ready and interpret the surrogate model, right? Measure how well the surrogate model replicates the predictions of the black box model. And how you can do that? You can use different distance measures. Like, say, for example, if it is a regression problem, you can simply use the R-squared measure, right? So that you can find the distance or difference between the predictions from the black box model and the predictions from the surrogate models. And the intent that you will have for the surrogate model to perform well, you will try, if the R-squared is close to 1, then the interpretable model approximates the behavior of the black box model very closely. That means you can be happy that fine, my surrogate model, which might be a linear model, is interpreting the black box model very, very closely, right? So I can now go with the interpretable model. In case the R-squared is 0, then obviously the black box model is not being explained by the surrogate model. We have to choose different parameters for the surrogate model and again give a try, right? So that way you come up with a global surrogate model. That global surrogate model will take a cumulative value of that difference for each of the data points of the test data, and then it will try to closely predict or rather closely approximate the overall predictions for the black box model. So that is called global surrogacy or global surrogate model. There is another way to build surrogate model, which is called local surrogate. That means we are trying to explain, we are not trying to explain the whole set of predictions. Say, for example, there is a test data set having some 50 instances. So what we are not going to do here is not going to build the surrogate model based on all the 50 instances. We are just going to focus on, say, one particular example, one locality, and based on that, we are going to force fit the surrogate model closely to the black box model. That way, for that particular instance or that particular prediction, we will be able to explain the prediction. Okay, a classic case would be, say, for example, if I am trying to predict the value of an real estate or the value of a house, right? And if we use a local surrogate model, say we used a neural network based model and it gave a very accurate prediction. But we are not going to, when say the customer comes back and asks me why you are asking this price, I will not be able to explain why, because the model which I have used is a black box model. I don't know why it has given that prediction, right? Now, I will build a surrogate model, a local surrogate model, and that local surrogate model is a linear model. So for the linear model, I know exactly which particular feature, say for example, square foot area of the house or location of that house. I know exactly how much weightage had been given. So I can now get back to the customer telling, fine, the price that you have been quoted is low because your house is in a location which is not at all close to the downtown. Or maybe your house is in a location which is close to a flood zone, right? So we can give very clear understanding to that person that why the model has given a particular prediction for his particular case. So that is the local surrogate that we are trying to build, right? So when we talk about this first model that we are going to talk about, local interpretable model agnostic explanations, or LIME, okay, LIME is the name. So when we talk about LIME, this basically is based on the local surrogates, right? It is trying to give a local interpretation, right? So that's why the name has local in it. So local surrogate models are interpretable models that are used to explain individual predictions, as I told, individual predictions, right? So LIME algorithm provides a concrete implementation of local surrogate models. Instead of training a global surrogate model, LIME focuses on training a local surrogate model to explain individual predictions. And the way it does is by generating perturbed samples. Again, we are going to look at it in a little while, how actually it does it. I mean, whatever steps we looked at in the previous slide, how actually LIME implements those steps, we are going to cover in a short while. Okay, so this is what, I mean, I think we have talked already about an example. So this is how it is trying to correlate. There is a model and there is a prediction. It tries to correlate. Say, for example, the model predicts a flu. It tries to actually zero in on which one of the parameters has been given the more weightage or has been responsible more for a particular decision making, right? So the way it does in a very layman's term is, so say for example, this is the particular local, that particular data for which it is trying to give that local explanation, right? So I am trying to explain why this prediction has been given at a particular class. Okay, there are two classes, class 1 which is dark and the class 0 which is light. So this is the 1 and this is the light 0, right? This is a 0. So I want to understand why this particular data element has been assigned the class 1, right? I want to understand. So what do? What does line do? It first marks the area of interest or the point of interest, and then whichever data points are close to that area, okay, or that particular data point, it gives a higher weightage to that. Okay, so basically it tries to measure the distance between the different points and the point of interest, and whichever points have a closer distance, like these points have a closer or shorter distance, they are given higher weightage. And based on that, the way it tries to do is it tries to build a linear model based on that. Okay, and that linear model tries to do a linear differentiation. So whatever lies to the right of this line is a 1, and to the left of this line is a 0, right? And this is a good enough explanation for this particular data point. If we look at the entire set of data points, this is a very stupid justification. But for these particular data points, it is a perfect justification, and that is what exactly it tries to achieve. For a nonlinear data also, it tries to create a linear boundary for that particular data instance which we are trying to explain, and it builds a linear model, right? That linear model gives a very clear boundary, decision boundary, that right of it is one class, left of it is a different class. And that's how it tries to do the classification, right? So this is how it works. And again, that was what we talked about here is a more of a structured data, right? If we look at unstructured data like image data, what it tries to do is it tries to say this is an original image, and this is a very weird kind of an image. It's a Labrador which is playing a musical instrument, which is a guitar. And that guitar, again, it might be an acoustic guitar or it might be a electric guitar, right? So now when we are trying to do an image classification, based on different situations, the model may classify this image as an electric guitar. Okay, if it only looks at this part of the image where this looks like an image, electric guitar. If it is looking at this part of an image, it might look as a acoustic guitar. And if it looks at the face of that particular object, it is going to classify it as a Labrador, right? Again, it can make all the three classifications with a different amount of probability, different level of probability. That is not important. Whether it is the right one, right decision or not is right now not the most critical concern. What we try to understand here is when it is saying, the model is saying that this image is of an electric guitar, or this image is of an acoustic guitar, or is this image is of a Labrador, why the model is saying that? Based on what part of that image is it saying that? That is what is our explainability or interpretability of the model. And what we are trying to achieve here using a LIME algorithm or any other XAI algorithm is to understand why an image is giving a particular outcome, and is that basis a right basis. For example, say this particular image, okay, this particular image is classified as a wolf, okay, which seems to be fair enough, and maybe the accuracy is also very high. But when we are trying to understand why this image has been classified as wolf, the explanation tells us that since it has seen the eyes, this eyes that is there in the background of the image is the reason why the model has called out the image as an image of a wolf. Then we can understand that this particular logic or this particular basis is a very spurious, very random basis. It is good that it's for this particular case, it's giving the right result. But in a different case, it might give a completely erroneous result. So the model is actually not performing well, right? So when we use the explainability, when we try to explain the algorithm, explain the AI model, right, we see that the basis on which the decision has been taken is a wrong basis. That means It is immaterial whether the inference is correct or incorrect. But what we try to figure out here is the basis on which the inference has been given. Is that basis a right basis or not? Is it a correct basis? Is it an unbiased basis? That is what we try to ensure here. Am I clear? Is the intuition becoming clear with all of us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, let me get into a little more details. Okay. Till now, we are just seeing it from a very high level based on which thing that it is yielding such a result. Now, let's get into a little more details about the actual philosophy of the Lime algorithm. Okay. So the way it works is it basically tries to churn out the specific spots of critical influence based on the ability of it to influence the outcome. Okay, what I mean to say is, say again, when I get back to this image, when I look at this particular set of pixels or these superpixels, these superpixels represent the face of a Labrador, right? So when I am perturbing this particular set of pixels, I am perturbing it in a certain way in contrast with something else. So my classification value is going to be changed if I perturb the pixels of this zone vis-a-vis when I perturb the pixels of some other zone. That is exactly what is being tried. So what we mean by perturbation is we change the value of that particular pixel and see whether the outcome is getting changed and whether the outcome is correct or incorrect, right? So if we just look at two very simple examples, say YouTube comments, and the YouTube comments, that's a text data. So YouTube comments, say for example, there is a comment which is marked as spam and there is a comment which is marked as non-spam, right? So this is a non-spam or a normal comment and this is a spam comment, right? Now, if I try to build a data set based on this, right? And how the result is going to look like, the columns are attributes are going to be each of these words, and the rows, what you are going to create in this particular situation is a perturbation, right? So let's take out an example. Otherwise, you will not understand. Say, for example, if I take this second line, for Christmas song, visit my channel, and this particular notation, right? So this, all of these words become one column, right? And each of these rows create a particular perturbation. So original for Christmas song, visit my channel, whatever this notation is. This is one particular row, row one. The second row has values. So this first row, this is the, for this particular row, every element will have a value 1 for these columns, right? Whereas I will create perturbations of this particular comment. So what I will do is some of the words I'm just going to eliminate. So in this first occurrence, I'm going to eliminate this word Christmas and this word my and this word channel. So what I'm going to have as a sentence, for song visit, then this notation. That is going to be one perturbation, right? And for that, I will use a particular model, an interpretable model or a non-interpretable, the black box model, sorry, the black box model to come with a decision, right? Now, again, we use a different perturbation, say for this one, and we again come with a particular decision. Okay, this particular probability is the probability of being a 1 or a 0, right? So if it is 0.17, that means the class value is going to be 0. If the value is say 0.9, 0.99, it is going to be 1. So it comes up with some probability value. I'm just having a column for the probability value, and there is a weight column that I'm going to add, which is basically going to calculate the influence, right? So say for example here I have changed 3 of the 7 columns, the values for 3 of the 7 columns. 3 of the 7 columns, I have changed the value from 1 to 0, right? So what do? I simply calculate the distance from the original one. I am using a very simple distance measure. So I am calculating the distance by, say, 1 minus 3 into 1 by 7. Whatever it comes to 0.57. Say, in this particular case, we are just perturbing one particular word value. So it is going to be 1 minus 1 by 1 into 1 by 7. So it is 0.86. So weightage is going to be 0.86. So what do? End of it, for each of them, I calculate the weightage for each of these words. And that way, I create something which is called feature weightage. So I find out for each of the different features. So in this case, our features are different words. What is the weightage it is having on the prediction? How does it calculate? Probability multiplied by the weightage, and it is going to go for a cumulative of that, right? Different occurrences or different perturbations, we calculate the probability, we have the weightage, we multiply, we do a summation of that. That way we calculate the feature weight, right? And say for example, this is the feature weights we are having. So what do we see? We see that the channel, the word channel is the most significant feature because the feature weightage is highest. So then we can say that for this particular case, the word feature channel is having the highest weightage to contribute that the sentence is going to be a spam or a non-spam. If the sentence contains the word channel, it is expected that it is going to be a spam. So this is the way we try to find out the different features or different, in case of text, the different words which have been responsible to make a particular comment as a spam comment or a non-spam comment. So what does it help us? It helps us to understand why a particular black box algorithm has predicted that this particular comment is for a spam. So it can then point out, since the comment had the word channel in it, that's why the comment has been marked as spam. Whether it is right or wrong, whether it is a valid justification or not, it's a completely different perspective. What we are trying to find out using the XAI algorithm is whether which particular element of the data has been responsible for the model to churn out a particular inference. That is what we are trying to achieve here. Is that clear with you all?
Do you explain the different perturbations of words in a sentence? Like you created that 1 and 0 columns, like rows differently. Yeah. Can you explain that bit a little bit?
Yeah, it's very simple. So in the normal comment, all values are ones. Okay, because all the words have occurred in the normal sentence. When you are creating the perturbation, you will simply drop some of them, or maybe one of them, or two of them. Okay, like that you create different perturbation of this comment. Okay, just by dropping the words. And when you drop the word, you mark it as 0. And when the word is considered, you mark it as 1. That's the simple logic you create here.
So
That's
basically, if a sentence has like n words, then we have to do like 2 to the power n entries and combine for each combination.
Exactly. You don't have to do anything. Lime will do it internally.
Yeah, I mean that's the algorithm what it does, and computes the probability and weight for each of the combinations and analyzes
and then finds out the weightage. You will see. I will show a case study. So you will see that what is the weightage given to a specific word, or maybe which specific words, set of words have the highest weightage. So that way you will be able to figure out which has been the words which have contributed for the algorithm, or rather for the outcome to be marked as a spam. Okay.
But wouldn't that create a like a computational downgrade, because we in a long paragraph or something we have a huge number of sentences and really long sentences. So in those cases, this computation will be pretty intensive, I think.
Absolutely, you are absolutely right. But right now, our concern is not that. We are not trying to go for an optimization, right? Here,
Yeah.
we are trying to do is to evaluate that I have come up with a model. Is that model a fair model? Is that
Yes.
model coming up with the inferences in a very fair and a decent way? Right. So that
Yeah.
is our intent. So at this moment, we can ignore the computational complexity part of it, unless it is completely NP-hard or something.
All right. Understood.
Right.
Hmm.
So I will now show you. I think we are running out of time. It's already
Sir,
6:05. Yeah,
sir,
yeah, yeah,
based on a single word means based on its weightage.
yeah.
So the Lime algorithm is means marking is add a spam or not. So don't you think that this algorithm is not working properly? Means based
Ah, okay. Uh, I will not answer to your question right now because that's going to take a lot of interest out of the discussion. Okay. I will park your question for the end of the discussion. Okay. But what you are pointing is in the right direction. Okay. But I will park the answer. Okay.
okay.
Okay, let's quickly look at a case study because I think that is where I'm just skipping these portions. Can you please go on mute, please? Okay, so I'm going to skip these portions, theoretical portions. So I'll just show you one very specific example. And I have not kept the Python code for it because that's not the intent for this session. So there is a very simple Python code and there are very simple Python libraries for Lime or the other algorithm I was talking about. So SHAP. So there are simple Python libraries for that. And the basic objective is very simple. There is a data called German credit rating dataset. Okay, there is the dataset, which is basically trying to classify a particular customer or a particular what should I say instance. Every instance represent a customer. Whether that person is worthy of getting a loan or not, right? So basically, it's a classification problem where the intent is to figure out whether the credit status should be a 0 or a 1. 0 indicating good credit and 1 indicating bad credit. If somebody gets a 0 status, he or she will get a loan. If somebody gets a 1 status, he or she will not get the loan. Okay. So this is the data set, and this is a very standard data set. There is something I think many of you already have heard about it. There is a data repository called University of California Irvine Machine Learning Repository. So that has a lot of reusable data sets at our disposal, right? So this particular German credit rating data set is from that repository, right? So this is a kind of a high-level thing that we have. The checking account, duration, credit history, different attributes are there, right? So it's basically a 14-column data set, right? And many of those columns are categorical data. So what we have to do is, I mean, we'll convert it to numerical data and we'll do all those things. So that's what we have done, and it has become a 37 column. Okay, forget all those things. We don't have to break our head on that. Now, when we run our XAI algorithm to understand, say there is a false negative case, right? And when we are trying to understand why this has happened, it is very clearly highlighting the reasons. So what were the factors which attributed, what were the factors which attributed for the person being demarcated as a good credit candidate or a bad credit candidate, right? It has highlighted very clearly, right? So based on that, you can get back with the customer. Say you can say that your particular checking account has a balance of less than 1,000. That's why we thought that you are not going to be a good candidate for getting a loan, right? So what you can do, that what Lime does is it does a ranking like this. So credit history, the 30, there is a specific attribute less than equal to 0, right? Duration, credit duration greater than 24. So for each of them, there is a weightage assigned for it. Okay, and based on the particular attributes which have a higher weightage, we can say, fine, this particular customer has been given a status 0 or given a status 1 because of this particular attribute, right? So now what I am able to, when I mean earlier, if I use say neural network based or an ensemble based model, okay, I didn't have the code here. If I showed you the code, you could have seen it. We first tried out with the XGBoost model, which is a ensemble model. We got absolutely phenomenal results, right? And then when we were trying to explain it, it's a very complex model. We couldn't explain it, why the results were coming like that. Then when we applied Lime on top of it, what we could see is, we could see that all the factors which are important for making a particular inference, that particular factor has been highlighted, right? So that case, we can actually go back to the customer with a very specific set of reasons why the inference has been that way. Or say, for example, a particular customer has been given a status 1, that is a bad credit customer. What are the things that he or she needs to improve so that next time he or she can be categorized as a good credit customer, right? So that is the basic premise that we try to drive at, and Lime helps us in driving at that kind of a situation. One thing that I want to point out, Lime is a model which is rather algorithm which is model agnostic. Right in the name itself, you see that there is a part which says model agnostic explainability, right? That means what? If the black box model is neural network or XGBoost or a random forest, it doesn't really matter. Lime can explain the inference in the same way. It will not be influenced by the fact that what kind of model is being used. It will be influenced by the ultimate outcome of the model, not the type of the model, right? So that is the reason why it is called model agnostic explanation, right? So two things are there. One is surrogate. It is the surrogate model. Rather, three things. One is it is a surrogate model. Second thing is it's a local surrogate model. It is trying to explain individual instances and the inferences for them. The third thing is it's a model agnostic, right? It is not dependent on the particular model, right? So those are the three things that I want to talk about. So this is the model Lime algorithm, and we can create this kind of fancy graph which can explain in a better way. So particular instance, why it has been classified in a particular way, which were the influencing factors. We can also express it in this kind of a fancy algorithm by using simple Python code, right? So that was about Lime. Let me see how much time we have. We don't have much time. So let me quickly tell what is the basic premise of SHAP. So there is something called, I think some of you at least have heard about the concept of game theory, right? It's basically a theory where we try to have a situation where there is a competition between players, and what we try to drive at is how much influence a particular player has on deciding the outcome of the game, right? So that player's contribution to the overall result of the game decides the payoff amount, how much money or how much reward is it going to get, right? So this concept of game theory or cooperative game theory we call, there are two types. We are going to talk about more of cooperative game theory or coalition game theory. So there basically the coalition between players, they decide how much that particular individual player is going to get as a payoff, right? And there is a very popular algorithm, or there is a popular puzzle, I must say, which is there, which is called prisoner's dilemma. I'm not going to get into the details of that because we are already running out of time. So bottom line is that same concept of cooperative game theory is being used and emulated in terms of calculating, or in terms of finding out the influence of a particular factor in a particular model's outcome, right? So there is something called a Shapley value. In the cooperative game theory, there is called something called a Shapley value. That Shapley value is a very concrete measure about the contribution of a particular player. And higher the Shapley value of a particular player, okay, that means the reward that particular player is going to get is going to be higher. In a very nutshell, that is what it states, right? So that Shapley value decides the reward that a particular player is going to get, right? And the same thing is being used in case of the SHAP algorithm. What it tries to do is, it tries to calculate the Shapley value. Okay, and how does it try to calculate? So it tries to calculate the Shapley value of a particular group of, using a particular group of attributes. Then slowly it tries to withdraw or add attributes and see what is the influence of that. So how much is the Shapley value changing, right? That marginal contribution of that feature or attribute is considered, and based on that it is being decided that which feature has the most dominant influence, or which particular factor has the most dominant influence in terms of a particular inference. That is used for explaining the algorithm. Like, say for example, if there is a particular attribute related to the location of a particular real estate or a house, so if that has the highest Shapley value, then as an explanation we can say that your particular house has fetched this and this price because your location is this and this, right? So that is how we try to explain the outcome of an algorithm, right? Is that clear with you all? Is it making sense? I know I'm going a little bit fast. So I'll just with a very quick example, and this example I'm sure is going to be like very much self-explanatory. Say there are two players who are playing a game, okay, and say V1 is equal to 10, V2 is equal to 12, okay, and these are, say, some Shapley values we are talking about. V12 is equal to 23, okay. Then there are two possible orders that are there. Either 1 comes first and then we have 2, or 2 comes first and then we have 1, right? So what do we do? So first we have, say we have the first occurrence where we see that the marginal contribution of 1 first, and then we see the marginal contribution of 2. So marginal contribution of 1 first is V1, which is 10. And then marginal contribution of 2 coming as second is V12 minus V1. So 23 minus 10, which is 13, right? So that's the first type which is possible, right? The second type which is possible is 2 comes first. So marginal contribution of 2 is 12. And then in that case, the marginal contribution of 1 will become 23, that is V12 minus 12, which is 11, right? Now, just think about it. In both cases, probability of occurrence of the first one as well as the second one is just half. I can either have one first and then have second, or I can have two first and then have then have one, right? So the probability is half. So how do I now calculate the Shapley value? For one, the marginal contribution, if I just multiply with the probability values, that is half into 10 plus half into 11. That is 10.5. That is the Shapley value of 1. And then I have the Shapley, the marginal contribution of 1. And then I have the marginal contribution of 2. That is, again, half into 13 plus half into 12. So that is 12.5. Right? Now, what we can say is the Shapley value of x1, say now 1 represents the feature 1. So x1, the Shapley value, we can say that it is 10.5. And for x2, the Shapley value is 12.5. Right? So this is a simple way to calculate the Shapley value. We can look at furthermore, say if we extend this to a much more complex game, say we now, instead of having 2 players, we have 6 players, and we have the individual values for each of these elements. We can calculate the marginal contributions and then the Shapley values for the, rather not 6 players, 3 players, 1, 2, and 3. Sorry. So we can again calculate the Shapley value for the features x1, x2, and x3, right? And then we can say probably the x3 is of highest importance because it has a higher Shapley value. This is the fundamental philosophy which is being used by the SHAP algorithm, and the algorithm is in a way based on the mathematical formulation of cooperative game theory, right? So this is the way SHAP calculates the this thing. I'm not going to cover all this in details. I'm just going to show you. Okay, no, I haven't seen. So if you look at the outcome of SHAP algorithm, you will see a similar kind of thing that we have seen in case of Lime, right? It will also churn out a set of features and the corresponding Shapley value. So the ones having the highest Shapley values, those features or attributes, you can say that these are the most dominant factors, right? This is the SHAP algorithm. Is it clear, everyone? Are you all with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it making sense? So we saw at one algorithm which tries to do random perturbation of the individual instances and the values for the attributes of the individual instances, and that way it tries to find out, right, the influence, and then it tries to kind of simplify it to either linear model or a decision tree model in case of regression or in case of classification, right? So that's one approach. The other approach we looked at is the SHAP algorithm, where it is based on the foundations of cooperative game theory. It calculates the Shapley value for each of the features, and the features which will have the higher Shapley values are considered to be more influential features, and based on that we can explain the outcome of the model, right? So this is how we do. Now I will come to the wrapping up discussion, right? There are some criticisms and very scathing attacks, I must say, very harsh criticism about XAI. Okay, so the first criticism is, or rather, let me kind of try to abstract it. The first criticism is we are in many cases trying to build proxy models or surrogate models. Now, the guarantee that those proxy models are going to exactly emulate the real models there is no guarantee for that. Okay, we are trying to make the best estimation using a simple model which is interpretable, right? Now, that is, I mean, that may not be close to reality. And in case it is close to reality or not close to reality, there is no one who can give a formal guarantee for that. So ultimately, the problem still remains in a large extent, right? The second case, so this is the point, one point. Second case, some explanations may not make sense at all. Even we have seen multiple cases where some explanations are making a lot of sense, but certain other explanations are not making sense. Okay, so there is a inconsistency. Okay, and again, that inconsistency may change if I adopt one algorithm for XAI vis-a-vis another algorithm for XAI. Each of them might give a different explanation. So my question in that case will be, which one do I take? Which one do I trust more and which one do I trust less? Right? So that is one other thing. Another point is, say for example, 90% cases explanations are correct, but there might be still some 10% cases where the explanations may not be seeming to be correct or may not be seeming to make sense. That case, again we are put back to square one. We cannot have an absolute trust on the algorithm, right? So again, the criticism is not fully eliminated. That's the thing. Last but not the least, in case of computer vision, saliency will point to a portion of the image at which a neural network is looking while classification. But the problem is, saliency will not tell you what exactly the neural network is doing. It will tell which particular area of the network, area of the image the network is looking at. Okay, but it will not say what exactly it is doing with that particular area of the network, area of the image. So that way again, the explanation is only partial. It is not complete, right? So that is again a challenge. So again, with this harsh criticism, we are somewhat pushed back few steps. We took a few steps forward. Again, we are pushed back by a few steps. So then we cannot actually say that XAI algorithms can help us take the decisions, or rather build the trust on the model outcome in 100% way. We will still have gaps, we will still have some amount of mistrust. We cannot say that 100% trust has been established. So that criticism is going to stay. But in that case, do we say that fine, then it is a nonsense, this is rubbish? That's not the point, right? I mean, obviously, when people are spending time on it, it cannot be rubbish, right? So I'm just keeping this portion. So the example that I was talking about when I was talking about line. See, in this particular algorithm, we see that the accuracy of the algorithm is quite high. Okay, in most cases, it is able to predict the right thing. Only in this particular case, it is wrong. All other cases, the predictions are completely accurate. But then, when we look at the interpretations, every time we see a wolf, right, the prediction is correct, but the image, portion of the image where the model is looking at is incorrect. Here, then when we look at here, then when we look at here, in all these cases, it is predicting a wolf because of the eyes, not because of the image of the wolf. It is not focusing on this portion of the image or this portion of the image. It is focusing on this portion of the image, which is a completely wrong way of prediction, right? So the answer is coming correctly, but the way the answer has been achieved is incorrect. So at the very least, we are able to get to some situations where we are able to identify some outright erroneous inferences. Again, here there is a text prediction problem, and somebody has been predicted as atheist. But just look at it. Wherever it has pointed out to edu, it has pointed out to NNTP, posting, host, again edu. So these are absolutely wrong features or wrong words based on which it has classified the test as a atheism. Okay, so that again means it has done the right prediction, but in the wrong way, right? So obviously we cannot trust this model. So again, the thing is, we cannot say whether the model is absolutely absolutely trustworthy. But at least for some models where the trustworthiness is very, very apparent, it is absolutely apparent that the model is not trustworthy, we can take a corrective action. Right? What corrective action we can take? We can probably take out these particular words from the training data. Or when we come to these images, what we can do is when we train the image next time, we just crop that image and focus on the facial portion of it. We just eliminate the eyes portion of the image. That way we are able to correct the model training process, right? So that way we are able to eliminate some of the bias, some of the inefficiencies in the training process. We cannot tell that it is 100% trustworthy after doing all this, but at least some of the initial screenings, some of the initial corrections we can make, right? So that's why the way should be what should we do? How can we trust the predictions are correct or not? How can we trust, how can we understand whether we are trying to predict the correct behavior, right? How can we improve that? So what we should more use to do is we can try to build the trust or increase the trust. We cannot probably establish 100% trust, but we can at least try to improve the trust level by using the XAI algorithms. Okay, so that way I think we can at least make some steps towards correction. May not be 100% foolproof step, but at least some steps to make the model better model for the prediction, right? So with that, I will close my discussion. Thank you for being patient and listening to me for such a long time. I will be very happy, though we are just on time. I will be very happy to take questions. And yeah, over to you, Dr. Shen.
Okay, thank you, Amita, for your such a delightful talk. Am I audible? Can you listen me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So thank you, Amita, for your delightful talk. I believe the students have a lot of things, and most importantly, you are learning the thing, and important is that in this area you should apply them. In the case study, Amita has very beautifully showed that how this theoretical application we are applying in the real life situation, because in research you are studying certain algorithms, but just by studying them it will not be helpful to apply in research. So who are going to apply something in research, you should have a very good idea about the particular business domain on which you are applying. So Amita covered both these things wonderfully, and Amita is available in our department. So if you have any question, any confusion, you can contact him directly in the department, or Amita, please share your email ID with the students.
Absolutely.
So if they have any question, they can send the question and you can give the answer. So from the student's perspective, if you have any questions, please ask the question to Amit sir.
Yeah, I have given my email ID. You can always get in touch with me. And many times, I mean, I think at least 2 days a week, I am there in the data science lab. On the Mondays and the Wednesdays, I'm there in the data science lab. So anytime you can always come down to me and we can discuss.
Yeah. So any questions from the audience?
Sir, can you share any document where we can do some further reading on the topic?
Okay, what I will do is I will share this PPT with Professor Shen. Okay, so he can circulate it with you. Yeah, and in the PPT, you will see in many of the slides, there is a reference given. Okay, either reference to a paper or reference to some YouTube video. So you can go to those places and look at those things. Those, I mean, collaterals. I think those will be very helpful for you.
Okay, so I think we can close the session now. And for the student, the next session is of Professor Saptoshi, Dr. Saptoshi Goswami. All of you know him. So that will be on the Thursday from 4:30 p.m. So thank you all for your time and patience. And many thanks to Amit for your delightful talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Shen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.